This night's story is not about empires or epics, nor about kings ascending or overthrowing thrones. It is about something slower, heavier, something that hangs in the air like the dust of ancient temples, breathing between the olive leaves and the threads of incense. It is about what it meant to be human in a world inhabited by the gods. Imagine waking up to the whisper of the wind in stone passages, where no sound is louder than the voice of the altar, and no step treads the dust without turning towards the sky. A world where life is measured not by years, but by divine favor or wrath. Before we delve into this quiet night, I would be pleased to know where you are joining us from. From which city, from which window, from which warm corner of this world are you joining? Tell us if you wish. And before you fall asleep, if you find this video worthwhile, do not hesitate to click the like button. If this type of story touches your interest, subscribe for more. The morning there was gray, cold of breath, slowly rising like a light smoke from a fire not completely extinguished. You open your eyes to the sound of sticks tapping on the gravel, the rhythm produced by the footsteps of priests preparing to start the rituals. The scent of ash mixed with dried herbs fills the air. In the corner of the square, before a stone altar, threads of incense stream out, like a breath ascending to the unknown. In this world, they don't say, "Good morning," but rather, "May your day be light on the gods." Every movement is watched, every sound could be an unintentional call or invitation to deities whose mercy or anger is unknown. A farmer does not dig the earth immediately. He places the first handful of seeds and whispers the name of Demeter, the goddess of harvest, then looks towards the sky where a cloud may or may not pass. The fisherman tightens his ropes while looking at the sea as if negotiating with a living entity, not just water. The sea here is not just a source of livelihood, but also belongs to Zeus, who might stir up the waves if angered, or Poseidon, the lord of the deep, who is only appeased by an offering tossed from the shore. In the markets, merchants walk cautiously, not out of fear of theft, but of luck. One puts a coin in his left shoe for Hermes, the god of trickery and trade, to bless him. Another does not start selling until he traces a small shape in the air with his finger, a symbol of protection from the eyes of gods or men. In every corner of life, there is someone whispering, someone pleading, someone trembling in the presence of the unseen. When a child stumbles, they are not told, "Be careful not to fall," but rather, "Did you disturb the gods?" It was not enough to simply live, you had to live cautiously. Every day is a narrow passage between the gods' pleasure and their wrath. Life is not only your effort, mind, and hand, but the contentment of beings you do not see and do not know when they decided to look upon you. It was difficult to be human because even in your silence, you might have erred. Evening descends slowly upon the Greek villages, like a heavy woolen cloak draping over the shoulders. Darkness does not come suddenly, it creeps between the branches, hides behind windows, and waits for the lamps to be lit in the houses built of mud and stone. The scent of simple soup emanates, a mix of lentils, olive oil, and a piece of bread baked that morning. But no one reaches for the food until the ancient words are spoken. It is a prayer, yes, but not like the prayers we know. It is not just supplication, but also a declaration of loyalty and an admission of fragility. To Hestia, the mistress of the hearth, they say, "Keep the fire alive and our hearts warm." The father, mother, or grandfather whispers it, and the moment passes like an unquestioned ritual. Sometimes a small portion of the soup is poured onto the ground before being eaten, a symbolic offering to the unseen, as a sign of appeasement. In these moments, everyone gathers in a circle, not to talk much, but to listen to the silence, to the sound of the spoon touching the earthenware bowl, and to the sounds of the insects outside starting their night. Conversation in the evening is cautious. Do not mention the names of the gods carelessly, and do not tell stories with angry endings. Someone whispers about a dream he saw last night, about a statue broken in a distant temple. Another responds with a look, then in a hushed voice, "Don't continue, they might be listening." The night, in the imagination of the ancients, is not entirely a safe time. It is when the spirits emerge, the gods roam, and they listen to every whisper. The stars are visible, yes, but they are not merely decoration. Every star might be a messenger, a watching eye, or a reminder of a destiny written long ago. Even dreams are not fully recounted, for people here live in a delicate balance between the desire for life and the fear of wrath whose reasons are not always known. Therefore, when the family retires for the night, the light is extinguished in stages, and a small lamp is left burning near the door, not just to illuminate the way, but to remind every passerby, visible or invisible, that this house seeks no trouble. It was difficult to be human because even in your sleep, you were not left completely alone. In the life of ancient Greece, days did not pass in vain. Every detail, however small, carried a greater meaning. There was no such thing as mere custom, but rather, a sacred rhythm. When a woman bathes near the spring, she whispers the name of a nymph into the water and places a flower on the edge. When a shepherd passes by an ancient olive tree, he touches its trunk with his hand and closes his eyes for a moment. These were not strictly religious acts, but the very breath of daily life. No one said, "I will pray now," rather, they prayed unknowingly because everything around them could be a dwelling for a god or a divine spirit. Small white stones were placed at the doors of houses, not for decoration, but to protect the place from stray spirits. In the corners of alleys, pieces of bread or drops of wine were left as silent offerings. Even the names of children were chosen carefully, not only for their beautiful pronunciation but to be pleasing to the gods, to appease them, or to hide the child under the shadow of a familiar name. When a child was born, a simple ritual was performed. The child was carried towards the domestic altar, and their hands were raised upwards, as if to say, "Here he is, we present him as he is, so pardon him or bless his first steps." Imagine yourself in that village, walking the same road every day, yet never tiring of it, because you know that your steps, however similar, pass over ground teeming with stories. Perhaps this very morning, Artemis passed here, or perhaps Apollo was pleased and sent this warm light over the hills. There was no certainty, no clear laws, but there was a dense faith that existence was not silent, but full of voices that could not be heard. It was difficult to be human because if you forgot this, you were alone, but if you always remembered it, you lived on the edges of fear in a world governed by divine will. The mistake was not something measured by intention. Often, a person's destiny was shaped by an oversight or a coincidence that was never intended. Imagine yourself uttering a word in front of an ancient statue, thinking it a joke or an innocent question, then days later, your crops fail without reason. Was what you said the cause? Or did one of the unseen eyes hear something inappropriate? This is how people lived, not only fearing the gods but fearing the mistake they did not know when they committed. A woman wears a black cloth on a day of celebration, passers-by see her and fall silent. Perhaps this is an omen, perhaps she angered someone. In the market, when an earthenware vessel falls and shatters, it is not called a fleeting incident, they look up at the sky and whisper words of caution. Sometimes a person is born with a slight defect, a shorter arm or a blind eye, and it is said that he carries in his body the trace of an old mistake committed by one of his ancestors. There is no direct punishment, no justice that can be negotiated, but there is Nemesis, the goddess of retribution, who neither forgets nor forgives, but does not announce when she will act. Humanity at that time always stood on a threshold between what it did, what it thought it did, and what it never intended at all. Thus, stories abound in those societies about those who lived ordinary lives then suddenly turned into tragedy, simply because they forgot, did not know, or thought that what they were doing was not being watched. Life under the shadow of the gods was not a linear life, but a circle revolving around favor, fear, and the unintended mistake. It was difficult to be human because you did not control your life alone, you shared it with invisible beings whose moods were unpredictable. The human being there was always in a state of apology, even if they did not know what they were apologizing for. In the beginning, there were no gods as we know them now. There was only chaos, the first void, the eternal night without form. Then Gaia, Earth, appeared spontaneously from the womb of silence. Then Uranus, sky, stretched over her, like a cover of bewilderment. Uranus feared his giant children born of the earth, so he pushed them into its depths, where they could not see. But Gaia could not tolerate this injustice, so she pleaded with her sons until one of them, Cronus, rose, raised the stone sickle, and cut the sky from the earth. Thus began a new cycle. Cronus became the new master, the lord of time, but like his father, he feared the prophecy. He was told that one of his sons would overthrow him, just as he had overthrown his father. So, he swallowed his children one after the other, Hera, Poseidon, Hades, Hestia, Demeter. But Rhea, his wife, refused to lose her last child. When it was the turn of Zeus, she hid him in a cave, wrapped a stone in swaddling clothes, and presented it to Cronus. Zeus grew up in a distant place where his father's breath could not reach. He was raised amidst the sounds of wild goats and the bells of rain, learning more from the world than from any teacher. He knew that the hour of confrontation would come, but he was not merely hateful, he knew that life is not given, but taken. When he reached manhood, he secretly returned to his father's house. He gave him a bitter drink prepared by the nymphs, and Cronus vomited up his children one after the other. Then the war began, 10 years of storm and ash, of the gods' screams and the echo of the mountains, between two generations, the fathers who refused to step aside and the sons born in the darkness who demanded their place in the light. The war erupted, and it was not like all wars. It was a war that tore the sky and shook the earth, where no swords were drawn and no armies fought, but rather colossal gods and primeval beings, each with his own strength and violence. Zeus and his siblings stood in one line, Hades, lord of darkness, Poseidon, lord of the waves, Hera, the wisdom that was not contained, Demeter, the green land of harvest, Hestia, the unextinguishable fire of the hearth. In confrontation with them stood Cronus and his allies, the Titans, giants of the first time, beings born when time had no shape and place had no name. The sky rained fire, and the mountains cracked under the weight of the battles. Every day in the war was an age, and every moment was full of transformations. In one moment, Zeus ascended a high mountain and called upon the Hecatoncheires, the 100-handed giants, whom Cronus had imprisoned in the depths of the earth. He freed them, promising them liberty and position. They came, shaking the earth with their feet, throwing rocks the size of villages, and lightning bolts tearing the horizon. Then Zeus sought the aid of the Cyclopes, the makers of thunder and lightning, who bestowed upon him his greatest weapon, the triple thunderbolt that neither misses nor is quenched. In a crucial moment, Zeus stood in the middle of the battle and raised a hand, and the sky lit up with white rays that split into hundreds. Cronus was cast onto his knees. The wind silenced, and the war stopped. But the victory was not just the defeat of the enemy, it was the reformation of the cosmos. The old generation ended, hid, or was exiled to the depths, and the new generation ascended to the summit, carrying their wounds and their gaze towards the sky. Thus ended a war about which nothing was written in stone, but which is still recounted in the echo. When the clouds of war lifted and the stones that had burned for 10 years cooled, the victors stood on the ruins of the old covenant. Their intention was not to build a completely just world, nor to break everything that was, but the goal was simple, to restore balance. Zeus, who until yesterday was a young warrior, now found himself in an unenviable position. He had to divide the universe. But how do you divide something so immense? The sky, the sea, the earth, the underworld, places that were not just geography but symbols of powers, destinies, and the unknown. The three brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, sat in a place called the edge of time, where human footsteps could not reach, and where the earth was still bleeding from the war's effects. The legend recounts that they did not fight over the share, rather, they drew lots. Each pulled a stone from an old helmet. The one who pulled the white stone would get the sky, the one who pulled the blue would get the sea, and the black would go to the underworld. Zeus raised his hand first. The stone was bright white, light as a piece of cloud, so he won the sky, the lightning, and the highest throne. Then Poseidon. His stone was blue, the depth of the night itself hid in it, so he descended to the waves to rule the depths, the harbors, and the sea storms. As for Hades, the black stone remained in his hands, heavy, cold, his silence seemed to swallow everything around him. He descended below, to the world that the sun never reaches, to rule the dead, the buried treasures, and all that was later called the unknown. No one complained, the roles were not just burdens, but responsibilities. Zeus, in his new sky, began building what would later be known as the Council of Olympus, a high place untouched by clouds, with halls of white marble and columns that stretched as if trying to touch the stars. Here sat the brothers and sisters, Hera, who would become the queen of the gods, the goddess of marriage and family, Athena, the daughter of wisdom, born from her father's head, Apollo, the god of light, music, and prophecy, Artemis, his twin sister, protector of the forests and the hunt, Aphrodite, the beauty born from sea foam, Ares, the movable war in the body, Dionysus, the wine, the madness, and the unrestrained joy. Each was given a symbol, a domain, and stories. But despite the new order, there was no perfect peace. The gods themselves were human in their desires, their jealousy, and their emotions. They argued, conspired, converged, and diverged. Zeus, despite his wisdom and power, was not immune to mistakes, and his many relationships and Hera's continuous anger made the sky a perpetual stage for drama. Yet, that moment, the division of the universe, was the cornerstone for a world that would be shaped slowly, a world not ruled by a single god, but by a delicate balance between multiple forces, each representing an aspect of the soul, the cosmos, and destiny. Thus, in the aftermath of the war, order was born, an order not without flaw, but one that at least gave things names, stars locations, and shadows shadows. This was the beginning of what would later be called the world as we know it. Among all the deities who inhabited Mount Olympus, no one cast a heavier shadow or wielded wider influence than Zeus. But Zeus was not merely the god of the sky and thunderbolts, he was the symbol of final decision, the one referred to in disputes, and to whom offerings were made when paths were confused and destinies intertwined. The ancients pictured him as a strong-bodied man, his features sharp as if carved from mountain stone, and in his eyes, a glow unlike sunlight, the very flash of the thunderbolt. His right hand held the triple thunderbolt, his greatest weapon that never missed its mark when used. But this brilliance did not come without a price. Zeus was always preoccupied, not only with organizing his complex relationships with the other gods but also with managing the human world. From the moment humans began building temples and raising their eyes to the sky, Zeus had to be present. He was the judge when the gods disagreed, and the one who restored balance when the scales of war, love, or luck tilted. But what is not always said is that Zeus carried within him a constant conflict. He knew he reached the summit not through love but through war, and what was built by force requires eternal vigilance, vigilance against threats, betrayal, and relentless change. Sometimes he would sit in a columned hall, listening to Hera rebuke him in a cold voice, or watching Apollo play his lyre, hiding looks he couldn't discern as respect or rebellion. With time, Zeus began creating laws, not to restrict himself, but to protect the system. The law of hospitality, for example, whoever violated it would face heavenly wrath, because one who feeds a stranger or opens his door at night must be honored, not exploited. Then the law of oath, whoever swore by Zeus and then lied had deceived the sky itself, and the punishment would not come instantly, but when the transgressor forgot his mistake, only then would the lightning strike. Zeus also had his human side, so to speak. He loved, erred, longed, and crept down to earth many times in different forms, once as an eagle, another as a golden shower, or a white bull. Each of these visits left behind a story, a lineage, or a human tragedy that began from a moment of encounter and ended in a myth. Zeus was not only cruel but sometimes hesitant. He would ask himself, as the unwritten tales tell, do humans deserve this much attention? Do all their prayers reach me? Or do some voices get lost in the noise of the earth? But the heavier question he concealed was, can a god be completely just if the world itself is unjust? Thus, Zeus remained in his high place, ruling, watching, getting angry, then forgiving, and in his heart, like all kings, a weight that no one else saw. In the high hall of Mount Olympus, where the gods sat on thrones of gold that did not shine as much as they intimidated, there was a seat no less important than Zeus's own, the seat of Hera. Hera, the goddess of marriage, the protector of women, the symbol of female sovereignty. But she was not just Zeus's wife or a submissive shadow, as some narratives portray her. She was a lady in her own right, with the severity of her gaze, the dignity of her presence, and a memory that never forgot an offense. Her marriage to Zeus was not a simple love match but an agreement between two powers, a contract between the sky and the system. She knew of his betrayals, saw his trips to earth, and hearing the names of mortal women and other goddesses was not new to her. But she did not leave the throne or retreat to a corner, she remained there, in the center of the hall, like an immovable stone. Hera was not only cruel due to jealousy but because she was the only one who understood the true cost of power. While others fought, played music, and planned, she was the one who maintained balance within the council. When chaos arose among the gods, when powers clashed on earth, when kings sought interpretation of heavenly signs, Hera was often the one who knew how to put things in their place. Therefore, she was majestic, respected, and sometimes terrifying. But she was not heartless. In many stories, she appears caring for pregnant women, whispering small prayers to them, or appearing in dreams to reassure a bride or warn a mother of a coming danger. She understood pain, betrayal, and fear, perhaps because she experienced them even on the throne of Olympus. Her voice was calm, but when she grew angry, seasons changed, the sun grew pale, and the gates of the sky closed. She, like Zeus, had her own laws. Whoever touched the honor of the family, betrayed an oath, or ridiculed the symbols of marriage fell under her eye, and Hera's eye never missed the one she saw. In a famous story, when a mortal woman bore a son to Zeus, Hera did not take revenge on the child but on the circumstances themselves. She made his life complicated, scattering small misfortunes and events that seemed random but were not. She did not strike with the thunderbolt, instead, she chose the slower pain that comes with time, with regret, and with the repeated question, why me? But conversely, when she loved, she granted an everlasting blessing. In one legend, a bride offered Hera a rare flower, and the goddess smiled and told her, from this day, your love will be like this flower, it will never fade in the eyes of the one who loves you. Thus was Hera, she was not easily satisfied and did not forget when she was angry, but when she honored, her honor meant something priceless. She was the lady, not only in the hall but in the stories told when the light faded, and in the prayers whispered near the cradle. In the world of ancient Greece, life was not written in agendas, nor were destinies drawn on walls, but on the hands of a specter of women who were not to be underestimated. In the heart of this world were three, or perhaps more, known as the Moirai, the Fates, the three who make the threads of life an arc that divides and a story that is shortened in a moment. Imagine the souls as small prayer mats on a suspended edge. Every soul waits, amidst a dim light and an unseen breeze, for a thread to be woven for it, a thread that begins, extends, and then is severed at the moment the title of the end is written. The act of these women was an unquestionable ritual. No one had the freedom to object, nor for thought to plead. Their threads were woven from silence, breath, and truth. They grew until the final moment, when the iron scissors were used to cut the destiny. At that moment, it did not matter the size of what you achieved, the depth of your love, or its greatness, but simply that the moment had come and the time was no longer yours. The language of time is only understood in silence, said a philosopher yet to be born, and perhaps it was said in a time unknown. People's thinking was simple yet profound. No mortal could appeal to a generous employee, and no mediation would succeed before those who neither see nor hear. Imagine yourself as a step you take, a word you utter, a breath you inhale. Everything, big or small, is subject to this strict judgment. And herein lies the mystery: life is not what you do, but what was destined for you, and you do not know it. Therefore, when a child is born with the talent of a poet and the path is straightened for him easily, no one sees how the fates wove his threads. But when a child falls into misfortune and no one knows the reason, it might be said, his thread was cut prematurely. Thus, the Moirai were the symbol of the inescapable destiny, the only limit that is not crossed, and the time that overtakes you without warning. From this cultural structure stems a deeper understanding that the human being here does not count for a moment or a second, but for what was addressed to him and when, before the curtain falls. It was difficult to be human because you are supposed to live, yet you know that your destiny might be decided before your first cry is breathed. At the foot of Mount Parnassus, among gray rocks that gleam in the daylight and hide in the morning fog, stands a small city barely different from other Greek cities, save for one thing: Delphi. It is not just a city, but a window overlooking the unknown, what lies beyond the question, and the echo of the gods when they decide to speak. In its heart is a temple dedicated to the god Apollo, god of light, art, and prophecy. But the one who spoke in it was not Apollo himself, but a woman, known as the Pythia, or the high priestess. She was not a priestess in the traditional sense, nor a reciter of daily prayers, but a medium. It is said that Apollo possessed her, or spoke through her, or left the echo of his voice in her. She sat on a tripod, a wooden base over a crack in the earth. From this crack, vapors ascended, smelling like a mixture of flowers and burning, and sometimes the wind would suddenly fall silent when she spoke, as if the earth was listening. People came to her from all cities, walking, riding, or crawling: kings, army leaders, merchants, virgins, and even thieves. Everyone sought one thing: a word from the gods. But the word did not come clearly. The priestess did not say, "Go," or "Stay," she whispered in a language that resembled a riddle. Perhaps she would say, "When you see the shadow walking before the sun, beware of the sea," or, "The tower that does not see the mountain will fall without wind." The questioner had to interpret, to guess, to arrange his words around the sentence as a drowning person arranges wooden planks in a river. One day, a king from the east came and asked her, "Will I triumph if I invade the west?" She said, "If you invade, a great kingdom will fall." He smiled and returned elated, and when he lost, he understood that the kingdom that fell was his own. Thus, Delphi was not just a temple but a mirror reflecting what was inside, not what was said outside. The word spoken here was not repeated, and if you lost it, you did not ask twice. Despite this, people continue to come, because in our deep interior, we do not just want to know, we want to be hinted at, to be given something vague that we can interpret as we wish, and on which we can hang our hopes, justifications, or fears. It was difficult to be human because you came bearing the heaviest question and returned with a word you did not understand. Back in the first tales, where humans had no warmth and fire had no name, there was a god from the old generation of Titans named Prometheus. He was not the strongest or the most awe-inspiring, but he was the most sensitive to humans. He saw them on earth, weak, cold, ignorant of how to bake grains or protect their young from the night. The gods of Olympus had created them, or perhaps their existence was a coincidence, but they paid them little attention. Prometheus, however, looked at them as a grandfather looks at his grandchild, with pity mixed with admiration, and a desire to make a difference, however small. Fire was forbidden, reserved only for the gods of the mountains and the heavenly palaces, because it was simply power, and power, as we know, is not given except at a price. But Prometheus decided to steal it. On a moonless night, he secretly ascended Mount Olympus, and with a hollow fennel stalk hidden in his hand, he took an ember from Hestia's hearth and returned it to earth, lighting the first fire in the heart of the first human cave. For the first time, humans saw the light dancing on the walls, heard the light crackling sound of wood, and felt a warmth spreading through their hands, like a tangible hope. But the gods saw, and Zeus, who never forgot a challenge, ordered an unforgettable punishment. Prometheus was taken and chained to a rock on a remote mountain peak, where an eagle came every day to eat his liver, and at night, his body healed to repeat the scene again every day, every night, endlessly. The punishment was not just for the fire, but for crossing the boundaries and granting humans something that was not destined for them. But Zeus did not stop there. He wanted to restore balance with a curse on humans themselves. He ordered the gods to create a woman of the utmost beauty. Hephaestus molded her with his hands from clay, Athena breathed wisdom into her, Aphrodite adorned her with beauty, and Hermes gave her a cunning tongue and a bright eye that was not easily read. They called her Pandora, and she was presented to earth carrying a jar. She was told it was a gift, but in reality, it was a box for every postponed evil. Pandora opened the jar, not because she was malicious, but because she was curious, a pure human trait. Out emerged diseases, death, jealousy, hunger, wars, and everything that humans have suffered from since that moment until now. When she closed it, only one small thing remained at the bottom of the jar, hope, that thing that is unseen but never disappears. Between the fire of Prometheus and the jar of Pandora, the human equation was born, power for a price, knowledge for suffering, and an unretractable mistake. It was difficult to be human because no matter how hard you tried, you could never return to the state before knowledge. In the time of the Greeks, not only walls carried stories, there was another surface, closer to the hand, the mouth, and daily life, pottery, dishes, jars, cups, vases. Everything touched had something recounted upon it, but these were not merely decorative drawings, they were a symbolic language that narrated, hinted, and reminded. Imagine yourself holding a small cup to drink a sip of wine. You raise it to your lips, and as you do, you see a small image on its surface, a man chasing his shadow, a woman opening a door to no end, or a god walking through fields as one of the mortals. What was drawn was not arbitrary. Every symbol carried a question, a warning, or a recurrent memory. Some scenes were repeated over centuries, as if someone was not content with just telling the story but wanted to hang it on every wall and every table. Among those scenes were Heracles raising the rock over his head, Oedipus standing at a crossroads, Narcissus bending over the water looking at his reflection. Each of these images was like a mirror within a mirror, showing you your face when you were not entirely sure what you saw. The artists who drew these scenes were not poets in the literal sense, but they left an equally deep impact. They had a hidden knowledge that humans forget words but do not forget images, that a story, when summarized in a symbol, lives longer, and that a drawing, unlike a poem, does not require translation. Pottery was the silent diary of an entire society, in which were written its myths, fears, kings, victories, and even its moments of absent-mindedness. On some jars, unusual scenes were found, eyes drawn inside dishes, or figures of gods with broken wings, or symbols interpreted only as dreams. It was said that some of these drawings were hidden messages, protection symbols, or even wishes. The pottery was not just a carrier of food or drink but a carrier of the dream, the idea you were not allowed to say publicly but could be drawn and left for those who understood to see. It was difficult to be human because you had to hide what you felt, but you let it appear when you held a cup or filled a jar. In the heart of Greek culture, death was not just an end but the beginning of a long journey. It was not as we know it now, a grave, silence, and perhaps a prayer, but death, in their conception, was a journey that passes through gates and requires a guide, coins, and a living memory. They believed that the human soul, after breathing its last breath, begins its journey to the other shore, to a world called Hades, named after its ruler, but which is at the same time a space of symbolism, fear, and mystery. The first thing the soul needs is to cross the river Styx, the river that separates the world of the living from the world of the dead. But this crossing is not free. Here appears a legendary figure named Charon, the silent ferryman who neither speaks nor bargains. His job is to sail the dead across in his boat, but only if they pay him. Therefore, the Greeks would place a small coin, usually an obol, under the tongue of the deceased to pay the fare. The one who did not have the coin remained stuck on the bank, a wandering spirit belonging neither to the world nor to the afterlife. After the crossing, the soul is not welcomed immediately but passes through what resembles a court, where its deeds are weighed and the traces of its steps on earth are read. 3 paths branch out from this moment, to the Elysian fields, where those who lived virtuously dwell in quietness and the never-ending rustling of trees, to Tartarus, where those who betrayed, killed, or transgressed are punished in eternal darkness and silence broken by nothing, and to Asphodel Meadows, the gray place where most people live, where there is neither bliss nor torment, just a peaceful, colorless existence. In the legends, even the gods did not dare to enter the world of Hades. Entrance was easy, but leaving was rare and difficult, conditional on exceptional circumstances. Even Orpheus, the great singer, when he descended to ask for the return of his wife, was only permitted on the condition that he not look back, and when he did, she vanished. The world of the dead, then, was an extension of life, but without a second chance. The Greeks drew this journey on walls, on pottery, and in poetry because they believed that understanding death was the only way to understand life. It was difficult to be human because you walked towards the unknown, with one coin in your pocket, and your eyes did not know whether they would remain open or not. In a world governed by gods and where humans were addressed through dreams and storms, there had to be a third category, beings standing in the middle, neither completely human nor gods in the full sense, but demigods, heroes born from a rare union between the world of the sky and the world of the earth. One of the most famous of these was Heracles, the son of Zeus and the mortal woman Alcmena. He came to life destined for greatness, surrounded by jealousy from his first moment. Hera, Zeus's wife, never forgot that this child was not hers, so she planted obstacles in his path, making his life a series of superhuman tasks, the 12 labors, as if saying, if you want to be different, pay the price. Thus began the labors, killing the Nemean lion whose hide no sword could pierce, catching the golden stag that never slept, cleaning massive stables untouched for decades in a single day. Each of these labors was a double test, a test of the body and a test of intention, a test of strength and a test of endurance. But Heracles was not the only one. There was Perseus, who cut off the head of Medusa, the woman whose gaze turned to stone, or Theseus, who entered the labyrinth of the Minotaur and emerged alive only because he tied a thread at the beginning of the path, and there was Odysseus, the cunning one, who was not the strongest but the wisest, deceiving enemies, debating the gods, and returning to his homeland after 20 years of absence, laden with regret and triumph together. What is striking is that these heroes, despite their glory, were granted immortality only in stories. Some were tricked, some lost what they loved, and some, like Achilles, were killed by an arrow in their heel, the single point not covered by divine protection. So what is the point of all this heroism? Why is the one with the semi-divine half burdened with all these tasks? The answer, as the Greeks saw it, is that closeness to the gods is not an absolute blessing but a responsibility and a constant conflict between what can be done and what must be done. To be a demigod means to be torn, seeing the high and treading the low, hearing the heavenly call and being constrained by a body that tires, yearns, and fears. It was difficult to be human, but perhaps harder to be more than human and less than a god. In a world that loved clarity and filled its walls with myths, there was a ritual that was neither drawn, documented, nor recounted except to those who lived it, the Eleusinian mysteries, Eleusis. Eleusis was not a distant place but a small town on the outskirts of Athens, yet in the imagination of the Greeks, it was a gateway between two worlds, where arcane rituals were held that connected man to the secret and to the great cycle of life, death, and rebirth. The rituals were held in honor of Demeter, the goddess of agriculture, and her daughter Persephone, who was kidnapped to the underworld by Hades. Grief reigned, the earth dried up, and the seasons stopped. When she was partially returned, Persephone spent half the year with her mother and half in the depths of the earth, giving birth to the idea of seasons and the cycle of fertility and loss. But what concerns us here is the ritual that grew out of it, which was not just a celebration but an inner transformation. People came from all cities, regardless of being rich or poor, slave or free, to pass through a series of stages: silence, purification, a long walk in the night, and then entry into the inner temple, where it is said they saw unforgettable things. But what were these things? Here lies the mystery. No one wrote it down, and no one explained it, because whoever did was said to have met their end afterward. All we know are fragments: that light filled the temple at some moment, that some came out crying, that some came out laughing, and that everyone came out with a strange feeling, as if they were no longer themselves. The philosopher Socrates said, "He who has not participated in the Eleusinian mysteries will never truly know what it means to be alive." Others said that after the ritual, they no longer feared death because they saw that death is not an end but a door. But how can a ritual in the silence of the night, between walls that do not speak, change a life? Perhaps it is because we, as humans, need what we do not understand. We need to pass through a moment that we do not analyze but feel. Thus, Eleusis was not just rites but an experience, not instruction but a transformation, granting you the illusion of understanding, or perhaps the understanding of the illusion. It was difficult to be human because you knew in your depths that the truth is not spoken but lived, and then its words are forgotten, and only its traces remain. In the myths of Greece, symbols were not granted arbitrarily. Every animal, every bird, every color, every flower had a place, a soul, and shadows that you only saw when you closed your eyes. There was not just an eagle, but the eagle that symbolized Zeus, that bird that not only flies but observes from above, seeing what is unseen and carrying lightning between its wings. If the eagle appeared in a dream or on a piece of pottery, there was a matter of authority, threat, or an irreversible promise. And not an ordinary owl, but Athena's owl, the symbol of wisdom, silent night, and sharp insight. The owl did not frighten but warned of understanding. Whoever saw it in the shadows of dawn was said to realize something that had been hidden from them. As for the serpent, it was not just a fearsome reptile but a symbol of renewal, change, and life that sheds its skin. Every betrayal, every transformation, every hidden seduction had the tail of a snake. Even horses were not just a means of transport, they were a symbol of restrained freedom, strong, beautiful, yet owned, as if a picture of man himself. When we read the myths, we find that every god's animal was an extension of the soul, not just a follower. Aphrodite was accompanied by the dove, the symbol of soft love and seduction that needs no sound. Poseidon had the horse, but it was a sea horse with fins, mixing speed and mystery. Even everyday things had layers of symbolism. The mirror was not just glass that reflects but a second door, a place where you saw yourself or saw what you feared to see. Fire was not just warmth but a decision, either to illuminate or to burn. The door does not just open but chooses when to open and for whom. This was the world of symbols for the Greeks, a network of meanings hiding in the details and reshaping life. Perhaps this is why they looked at life as a monk looks at a sacred book, not because he understands every letter, but because he believes there is a meaning behind everything. It was difficult to be human because you had to learn a language that is not taught, a language spoken through feathers, stone, and color, and understood only if you endured enough. The numbers for the Greeks were not merely tools for calculation or measurement, but in their view, hidden keys to understanding the cosmos. They believed that every number carried a personality, a significance, an energy, and they held the conviction that behind the numbers lay a heavenly balance, akin to music, where every note had a position and every distance a calculation. Among them appeared a man named Pythagoras, whose name is associated with triangles today, but then he was more like a mathematical priest who saw spiritual secrets, not just equations, in numbers. He said, "The world is number, and the number is sound." Imagine seeing the number 1 not just as a beginning but as a symbol of unity, the origin, the indivisible essence. And seeing the number 2 not as the next count but as a sign of duality, light and darkness, night and day, man and woman, sky and earth. 3 was the balance, the beginning, middle, and end, birth, life, and death, as if it were the complete framework for any human experience. They believed that temples must be built according to specific numerical ratios, that music, to be effective, must adhere to dedicated frequencies, and that the planets, in their rotation, produced what they called the music of the spheres, melodies not heard by the ear but felt by the soul. Even in religious rituals, numbers were used carefully, 3 steps before reaching the altar, 7 movements for the incense, 12 days before the harvest season. These were not coincidences but a cosmic language. What frightened some was the number 4, the number associated with the corners, the material, the heaviness. It is the number of the earth, but it carried within it the danger of stagnation, to remain where you are, neither ascending nor changing. The number 10 was sacred, it is the sum of all the numbers before it, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 is equal to 10. Hence, the 10 fingers were a symbol of completeness. Therefore, you find that most rituals, myths, and heroic tasks come in tens or their multiples, but the number that was not easily spoken was 0. They did not know it or did not acknowledge it, because in the idea of nothingness lay a philosophical danger and a bottomless abyss. 0 meant absence, and when the number is absent, all meaning is absent. It was difficult to be human because with every step, you counted what you did and searched for a meaning in the number, and you did not know whether you lived in a calculation or in an unwritten equation. In ancient Greece, temples were not just places of worship but the architectural echo of the idea of eternity. The temple was not built only to be a shelter for the gods but to be a speaking stone that said, "We were here, we believed, we drew our destiny on the walls." Every temple, from Athens to Delphi, was built not out of a desire for decoration but out of a deep psychological need to put something in the face of time. The temple was not a place for crowds but for individuals, not as a colossal structure bustling with prayer but as a quiet, rocky heart inhabited by an invisible energy. The columns were towering, not because they challenged the sky, but because they reminded you of your smallness before existence. Their height and precise curves were designed according to mathematical ratios, as if they were a visible translation of the harmony of the cosmos. The inscriptions on the walls were not just stories, they were chapters of the collective memory. Every carved shape was a sentence, every engraved name was a witness, and every scratch was a trace of a human hand that passed here, left something, and moved on. In the Acropolis in Athens, when you walk between the white columns, you feel something deeper than marble, as if the earth itself is telling you what it saw. You find scenes of gods being born, kings receiving the crown, wars summarized in two intersecting spears, and carved eyes looking at you despite the passing of years. But the temple was not static. Inside was the sacred statue, the image of the god made of gold or painted wood, treated as a living being, washed, dressed, and offered food and flowers. The center, the naos, was a dark place entered by light only at a specific moment of the year, when the sun passed through a small hole and struck the statue in its eye or heart, a silent, theatrical moment that was considered the climax of the meeting between man and God. All this was built, rebuilt, and guarded because the temples were a contract between the present and the past. If a temple fell, something of the identity fell with it. Even in moments of invasion, the enemy was not content with killing but demolished the temple, because demolishing the temple is erasing memory, it is a declaration that, you were not here. It was difficult to be human because you knew your body would perish, but you wanted your stone to remain a witness that you believed, feared, and tried to understand what is not understood. In the lives of the ancient Greeks, food was not merely a biological necessity nor just a daily pleasure, but a sacred, theatrical event, saturated with meanings. Every meal involved layers of rituals, symbols, invocations, and offerings. Eating was not a simple act to end hunger but a social moment.